a prototype represents enough appearance and function of an idea so that you can use it for user research. Okay? So we're going to see in this part basically a bunch of examples of stuff that can be considered like prototypes. So here you see basically a bunch of examples that go from very low fidelity to high fidelity. Okay, so for instance, a series of screen designs from Photoshop, so what we called mocks, can be used as a prototype if you want to focus only on visual design, for instance. Storyboard or cartoon-like series of scenes actually can be used for in a concept study, for instance. So there's a little bit more detail about how the flow will unfold, but pretty rough. If you have like a piece of wood that you use to simulate a device, again, very low fidelity, right? And then you can go up to something that is more and more refined. So you can have like a simulation, and then you can have like a PowerPoint that is a little bit interactive, so that when you click on parts, it jumps to different parts of the presentation. And then you can even go to a prototype done with proto.io, okay? And this is like more high fidelity and so forth. Low fidelity prototypes are not bad in itself. I mean, depending on what you want to test, I mean, they can be useful because they are quick to make. You can iterate very, very fast, and you can get like feedback from participants. But obviously, they can be very far from the final product. Okay. High fidelity prototype, on the other hand, I mean, they have like a look and feel that is much closer to the final product. But given that they are fully interactive, I mean, they might need some more engineering time, and you will see that because as soon as you will start working with proto.io, it's going to be like hours of work, not just minutes of work, right? And so you will feel that kind of cost of producing this kind of prototypes. So if we put this in a matrix of low versus high fidelity prototypes and advantages and disadvantages, obviously low fidelity prototypes can be used to communicate ideas, to ground conversations in teams, but they are very bad for testing with usability. With end users, because obviously they're pretty imprecise. High fidelity prototype, on the other hand, I mean, they can really be used to get very good feedback from the users. They are much more close to the final experience, and so they can be used for usability studies, and you can even leave like the users alone interacting with these prototypes. And so the disadvantages obviously is that they are costly. If you use it too early into the process, people might start focusing on details that are completely unnecessary, because maybe you are still discussing the general idea and they jump too much into the colors of icons or position of buttons. That is not very useful at this stage. Okay. We have a distinction between what we call horizontal prototyping and vertical prototyping. Basically, and this is actually very is responding to some of your comments that you have done earlier. You said, do we need to prepare all the screens and all the functionalities on the site that we are working on? If you do that, then it will be like more of a horizontal prototype. Okay, so it spans on everything, but it doesn't go in very much details. A vertical prototype is something that actually focuses only on one functionality or one use case, one interaction flow, and it has all the necessary details for that specific use case. Okay. point of doing a prototype is that you will incur into an opportunity cost every time you do a prototype. Okay. So when you talk with a prototyper, a person that actually does this for a living, and you ask, I want to build this prototype, the main question that this person is going to ask you is going to be, okay, how much time do I have? Okay? Because you can build a prototype in 24 hours, you can build a prototype in a week, in a month, in a year. Okay, depending on how much time you give to the prototyper, you can have more details, less details. Okay, so it's always like a compromise of how much time you want to invest into this thing and what you can get out of it when you test. Okay, and so you need to ask yourself the question. I mean, what is the main question that I have that I want to answer with this prototype? And then you should actually work out to only add the details that make sense for that question. Don't spend too much time on unnecessary details because they are not going to make you progress in your tests. So this is like a good examples because you can see, this is like coming from a research prototype, and this team of designers actually wanted to design one of these handheld cameras, right? And so depending on the specific parts of their production cycles, they made like different prototypes for the different questions that they had and that they wanted to get feedback on. So one of the research questions that they had was on the handle. Actually, the piece of tissue that you put around the hand basically to hold the camera. Okay, and so for that part, they didn't need like a fully functional camera. They just put like a piece of wood and then they attach like the actual part of the camera, and they actually ran like a test only on that specific part of the design. Then they organized like a second cycle of tests, and they wanted to focus on the software, the onboard software that appears when you open basically the lid, and you have like the interactive display of the camera with which you can start and stop the recording, right? And so for this, they didn't even have like a device. They tested on a regular computer, on a regular screen, and they only had like the components of the interactive panel with the controls, and they asked the participant just to click on the controls according to the tasks that they gave them, right? And then finally, for the design of the buttons, then they had like a third prototype that was only focusing on different designs of the panel that goes on the back of the camera, okay? So you see here basically that according to the specific research questions, they made like different prototypes that were only focusing on a subset of features or details that are necessary to answer the research question. Okay? And so this work of coming up with the most necessary elements of the design is called filtering. And then here you see basically different dimensions that you can use to filter the design in order to produce like a prototype. So for instance, you can filter by appearance, and then you have like certain qualities. You can filter by data, functionalities, and so forth, right? So this again comes from the same research paper. And so there are also other dimensions that we call manifestation of the prototype, where we can actually work out different research questions. For instance, the material manifestation, whether it takes like a certain medium or another, for instance, whether it's a physical element or whether it's a piece of software. The resolutions, the number of details that we put into this prototype, and the scope. Essentially, the scope covers the amount of functionalities, the amount of use cases that you want to focus on with your prototype. So typically here you have like this distinction between a vertical and a horizontal prototype. And then, as I mentioned, is an opportunity cost. This is the economic principle. You try to keep it as simple as possible and as efficient as possible with regard to the specific research questions that you have. Okay, this is another example, again, that comes from this paper. If you remember, like a few years ago, there were these SMSs were actually the equivalent nowadays of WhatsApp. Nokia was one of the most famous designer in this arena, and they had like this Nokia OS that actually was one of the first operating systems where you had like the concept of inboxes for SMSs and so forth. And so this is actually a few iterations on the prototype that the team in Finland actually used to produce basically the design of the messaging feature on the Nokia OS. So they started with paper prototypes. So here, basically, this was just drawn on a piece of paper, and they used that to conduct an initial test of the different categories that they had in this list. Then, actually, they rendered that into a computer interactive prototype. So here, basically, the participants had to press like keys on the keyboard in order to activate certain functionalities into this menu. And then they could see what was contained in each of these menus, right? And then finally, they rendered that into Symbian, which is the operating system at the time that was used into Nokia phones. And actually, to produce that, it took like years of work. Obviously, to do this, a couple of much less stuff. Okay, so with that, we are done. For next class, basically, the teams presenting will have to present an interactive prototype and outline the plans for testing the prototype. I think I'm going to stop here. If you guys have questions, feel free to reach out. If you have troubles also with proto.io, feel free to reach out, and we will try to find the best way for you to test your ideas. Okay? And I'll see you guys next week.